Welcome to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel, and on today's episode, I'm speaking with Sonido Reyes, an award-winning and best-selling author who is best known for tackling difficult topics through a hopeful lens. They write stories celebrating their own queer and Mexican identities, including The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, the Luis Ortega Survival Club, the Broposal, and the Golden Boy's Guide to Bipolar. They have also contributed short stories to the anthologies Transmogrify and For the Rest of Us. Sonido is also the vice president of My Galvanized Friend, a nonprofit focused on providing access to and amplifying LGBTQ+ writing, art, and creators. Sonido, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you about your writing and a lot of the work that you do, and another part of your experience that you wanted to share on the show. So I had put out a call on Threads a little while ago looking for people who wanted to share their experiences, and one of those was lived experiences of schizoaffective disorder. And you reached out and were kind and willing enough to share more of your experience with that. So what is schizoaffective disorder, and how is it different from schizophrenia?
I guess I would categorize schizoaffective as kind of like a mix of schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder with a mood disorder. So for me, it's schizophrenia and bipolar. So it's kind of like both in one disorder. So I do have schizophrenia and bipolar as well with my schizoaffective. They're both like part of that. So for anyone who doesn't know what the schizophrenia, I can speak to like how it manifests for me. Everyone's experience is different. But for me, it comes with, hallucinations or delusions. And bipolar is like the mood thing where sometimes I'll have periods of mania or just like so much energy, impulsivity, not having the best grasp on reality, and then depressive episodes on the latter half of the hour. It's just like no energy, real sad.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for kind of giving the description and a little bit about your own experience and what that's like for you. How did you get diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder?
So psychosis unfortunately runs in my family. So before I was diagnosed, I had an idea that I was schizoaffective. I kind of knew what it was because I had other family members who had that. And so when I started seeing a psychiatrist and a therapist, I think this was like 2019 when I got diagnosed. I could be wrong on the year, but I already knew for myself that that was probably what it was just because of my family members. But I basically like told the psychiatrist my, family history and then all of my own stuff. And I was like, I'm pretty sure this is what it is, but I don't know, you tell me. And he was like, yeah, that
Mhm.
basically like agreed with me. So for me, it was a lot more straightforward than maybe people who don't have an experience with it with people close to them, because I kind of already knew like what it looked like and had done a lot of research on it beforehand because of the experiences I've had with it in my family.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, that family history kind of gave you more an understanding of what the condition could feel like and what that looked
Right,
like. So that helped with the diagnosis, I see.
right.
When you were growing up, did you have any kind of early indications that you had it, or kind of what was life like growing up?
So looking back, it's kind of hard to say when exactly the symptoms started. I know probably in high school, like I feel like before that, I've always had kind of like depression and I struggled with that side of things. But as far as the hallucinations and the psychosis, that didn't really start until I was a teenager, I think, at least to when it really picked up. And for a while, I just thought it was like paranormal, or which some of it maybe it was, but I do think that like there's a difference for me at least. I unfortunately didn't have a lot of, like, I know I said that it runs in my family, but I wasn't very close with the people in my family who had experienced this, either that or they were no longer with us. And so I didn't really have at that time someone that I knew to like go and ask about it. So I just kind of thought that I was like, I don't know, seeing demons or something like that. But that's when I remember kind of like it started around that time.
So a big part of that, of course, is hallucinations and sometimes delusions go along with can go along with that as
Right.
well.
Right, like paranoia and yeah. I guess that was another thing too, like around that time I was getting really paranoid. Like I always thought that there was someone who was out to get me or someone was gonna like I don't know, and then someone was watching, like I thought there was cameras everywhere. Like I would test all the mirrors and the
Mhm.
drains and stuff for like cameras. And yeah, so I was really paranoid about that stuff at the time too.
Yeah. And were there friends or family members who said, like, hey, this is unusual? Or did you realize that in yourself as you were going through the paranoia? I'm like,
I think I've always been really good at hiding it.
mm,
I don't think anyone saw it coming really,
yeah.
except for me, until I started talking about it. I didn't talk about it then. And if I did talk about it, I talked about it with my peers who in high school, I had a lot of friends who like did drugs and stuff. And so for them, they experienced certain hallucinations when they were high. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, I'm just like you. I wasn't doing any drugs, but
Oh.
that was like the connection for me. It was like, oh, it's just like that, except I don't need drugs to whatever. Like that was like
Oh.
my younger self thought that that was just like, oh, well, yeah, people experience this, but some people take drugs first. I didn't really like know the extent of how concerning or not concerning it maybe was,
Yeah.
but I didn't really talk about it to my family really for like a long time. I think we have like a big stigma in our family about like not being okay.
Oh.
And so, unfortunately, a lot of the people in my family who have struggled with this like haven't talked about it either.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have in recent years been trying really hard to just be super open about it because you never know who's struggling unless they feel safe enough to talk about it. So I'm just like, maybe there are other people who like don't know how to talk about it, but then if somebody else is already talking, then it's easier, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until I started like intentionally talking about it that I think people realized what was going on.
Yeah. No, that makes sense because there is such a huge stigma, unfortunately, against schizophrenia, any kind of
Yeah.
psychosis and delusions and things like that. And yeah, I'm sure there are a lot more people than we're even aware of who kind of privately struggle with it and don't want to
Yeah.
show it because, in part, because of that stigma. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sorry, I might get on my soapbox for like a little bit. I found out a long time ago that like apparently when you have schizophrenia or like other psychotic disorders, the more episodes you have, the worse your episodes get.
Oh.
So once I found that out, I was like, oh, so I'm never gonna get better. Oh, so like blah blah blah. But really, I should have taken that as like, oh, so I should seek help now versus waiting until
Mm-hmm.
it gets worse. And then when I did seek help, like I did actually, I feel I am a lot better now than I was then. Like I know how to like, spot the signs before stuff happens, and there are ways to cope and ways to like be, you know, living a good life with
Yeah.
this illness. So like I would just say just try to, talk to someone about it before before it gets to that point, if you
Yeah.
can.
No, that's a really good point, that there are actually different types of treatments that can help. And of course, it depends on the person. And
You might have to try a few different things. Like it's taken a while for me to get to this point.
yeah, that's great that there are treatments and therapies and things that can help. Yeah.
Right.
You talked about this a little bit earlier, but I guess these days, how does schizoaffective disorder kind of impact your everyday life?
These days, I struggle a lot more with the mood disorder side than the psychosis side, just because I'm on antipsychotics right now.
Hmm.
That might change because my insurance went up a lot, and so I
Wow.
might have to change around my med situation and stuff, which is unfortunate. But
Yeah.
for the last few years, it really has been more of like the mania that's been the problem because I'm an author and with writing books comes some really exciting events that sometimes trigger a manic episode because I think it's just like when really exciting things happen, I guess the chemicals in my brain just go a little haywire and I get too excited and then it just lasts for weeks instead of that
Wow.
day. So, and then of course, like I crash after that and so that's probably what I struggle with a lot more, trying to kind of manage how excited to get. And that's like hard because I want to be excited about accomplishments and I want to celebrate and all that. That's the thing that I guess I haven't figured out yet is like how to gauge like what is, a healthy level of like excitement versus when it starts veering into like slipping into mania.
Yeah, that's got to be really difficult to detect. Have you had manic episodes where you're writing for like hours and hours and hours and days?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like I didn't know when this happened that it was probably a manic episode, but with my first book, The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, there was like a 24-hour period where it was probably more like 27 hours because I didn't sleep the whole time and I was writing the entire time and I wrote like 22,000 words.
Wow.
And I've never done that since and never want to. But I finished that whole book in like 16 days, and that 24-hour period was like so intense. And that's when I finished the book.
Yeah.
So it was kind of the tail end of that drafting that I went into a manic episode, and then I just like finished the book and didn't sleep for forever. And I think that was the most intense productivity that happened with mania, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't recommend it. Like it's it wasn't good words. Like the
Oh.
the book was bad back then. Like those 22,000 words had to be severely revised.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Again, finding that balance is got to be a challenge, especially if it's
Yeah.
something that you really love doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I've gotten a little better at that part now. The worst part, it's not so much the productivity and stuff, because like, who doesn't like saying you were very productive. I don't like
Right.
being productive, but I like saying I was productive. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but it's more like I have to be careful about like impulsive decisions when I'm in that space because I will like spend all of my money.
Wow.
And as an author, I get paid in bulk. So if I get paid once in 6 months, I have to make that money last 6 months. If I spend it all because I'm manic, then I'm like kind of screwed. So, and I have done that before and it was really, really rough. So that's the bigger thing. I was like trying to like manage the impulses. I think just being able to spot it, like, oh, I'm manic right now. So like I really
Mm-hmm.
don't trust all of the things that I want to do in the
Mm-hmm.
next couple weeks.
So having at least being able to be aware that you're in a manic state that
Yeah.
kind of helps you a
It
little bit.
does a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also have like a rule for myself because I don't always spot it. So
Mm-hmm.
like if I want to spend more than like $100 on something that isn't a regular payment,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do it for 2 days.
Oh.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
like I have to like write down the thing that I want to spend the money on, and then if 2 days later I still want to buy the thing,
Mm-hmm.
then I can do it. But if I'm manic, there's no way I'll still want to after 2 days because I'll
Oh.
be have moved on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my rule that's kind of like saved me from doing that again.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good rule. It's good to have those kind of guidelines,
Yeah.
and that sounds like it's really helpful. Schizoaffective disorder and psychosis and other conditions related to that, there's still a lot of stigma in society. It's not really well understood by a lot of people. I guess, in your perspective, what are some of the most important things about schizoaffective disorder that you'd like people to either know or understand better?
I think that everybody is different. And this goes for like any stigmatized illness, not necessarily just schizoaffective or psychosis, but any stigmatized illness. Everyone's different. Like you might have had a bad experience with someone who was mentally ill, but that doesn't mean that like everyone who has that illness is going to like do that to you. It's like the same thing with any kind of prejudice. Like, yeah, there are bad people who are of every demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So there are bad people who are schizoaffective, but it doesn't mean that everyone who's schizoaffective is bad because they're schizoaffective. I feel like that goes for especially like, bipolar and borderline and really anything that people have a bad feeling about. Like if you hear that someone has a certain disorder and then your first instinct is to close up or whatever, I
Yeah.
think that's something to address within yourself because everybody is their own person. And really all the diagnosis is it's like a tool now to know better how to manage your symptoms. So now that I have a diagnosis, I can now get treatment versus not having a diagnosis. I was still schizoaffective before I had a diagnosis. I just wasn't medicated and I wasn't in therapy for it and I wasn't getting help. So like I would say someone who knows their illness is probably a lot safer than like because you have like coping tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that anyone is unsafe for not knowing. It's
Right.
just like when you know it's easier to know how to manage your symptoms. I think it's really just like on an individual level, like because even between everyone who has the same illness, like not everyone's going to experience their symptoms the same.
Hmm.
So you can't really know how one person is going to be just because they have a specific disorder.
Hmm. Yeah. So not making those assumptions about someone just because they have a
Right.
particular
Because
disorder. Yeah.
technically, schizophrenia, there are like, I think like five symptoms, and you only need three of them to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Everyone thinks of schizophrenia as like hallucinations or delusions, but those are two of the five. So you could have three that aren't even those two and still be considered schizophrenic, have that diagnosis, and nobody would ever think of you as schizophrenic by knowing what your symptoms are.
Mhm.
I think being more educated about stuff is definitely helps reduce stigma, I think, too.
Oh, yeah. Wow. I'd love to learn more about your writing and kind of how you integrate your neurodivergence and your other identities into the types of things you write. How do you choose either the topics or the stories that you want to write about when you're writing your books?
So I think at first I kind of fell into contemporary stories about like real people and real problems that real people have.
Yeah.
Because I actually had a lot at the time, a lot of ideas that were like fantasy and sci-fi and all that. But for my first book, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna write something that I don't have to research into like how this world works and like all that. So I thought it'd be like quote unquote easier to write about like lived experience that I have, or at least like someone who is similar to who I was in high school. So the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School became a book. But usually there's one or two things that I really like feel like I need to either process or that I feel like I really want to talk about in every book. So even because I do have stuff in the works that's not contemporary anymore, but for everything, I feel like that's pretty much what it is. It's like there's a thing that I want to talk about. So for Golden Boy's Guide to Bipolar, which is a spin-off actually to The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, so it's from the brother's perspective of the main character in the first book. And that one, I knew that I wanted to write a book about a bipolar character. And I really, really wanted to do that character justice because I know how stigmatized that illness is. And so I decided to make that book from a character who my readers already knew and loved. I didn't want people to come in with a prejudice. Like they go into this book not knowing they like in the Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, he doesn't have his diagnosis. So people didn't know he was bipolar until this book came out. They knew there was something going on, like he was struggling with something, but I really wanted it to kind of feel like how it might feel if you know and love someone and then they're going through something and they get diagnosed. And so I hope I did a good job of like making this character someone that people already rooted for and already loved because I didn't want anyone to have any prejudices already on the character.
Mhm.
So that's why I chose him for that because people were like, before that book came out, they were like, he's my favorite character. And
Mm.
I just felt like he was like the perfect one to explore that through.
Yeah. So that sounds like one way that you integrate your neurodivergence into your writing is, through the character who's bipolar. Do you ever write about schizoaffective or have that integrated into any of your characters?
I haven't yet published anything with Schizoaffective. I have written them, but I haven't like started the process to try to get them published yet. It might be too soon for me. But I don't know. I have books that I've written and books that I have yet to write that I plan to write with Schizoaffective. And I think it's just like a matter of like finding the right story to put it out because it's hard because I have so many things. So my other books have multiple autistic characters in my books and queer characters, trans characters, like a walking diversity checklist that I can't put all of them into every book,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate because there are a lot of people who like comorbidities are a thing. Like people usually don't have just one thing. So I've kind of had to like, ease people into it one thing at a time. I add another thing onto the next book and then I add another thing in the next book.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I do plan to have those books, but publishing is so slow. So if one comes out with that, it probably won't be until like, I don't know, 2028, 2029. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a while, unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
because I have like other stuff in the assembly line, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do want to, for sure.
Well, that's great. And yeah, as you said, you've already it sounds like you've written things also that incorporate your other identities outside of
Hmm.
neurodivergence, like, being queer and Mexican and that part of your
Hmm.
life. How does that influence your writing? Like, is that a little bit part of every book, or you kind of think about where you want to introduce the characters like that?
I feel like all of my characters are going to be some flavor of queer, and they're all going to be Mexican or like Mexican coded if it's not a story that takes place on this planet. Like, like
Oh,
if it's
okay.
a fantasy or something, they're all going to be like Mexican adjacent. And that's intentional. And then everything else, whatever feels right for the character or that story. It's not always the main character, but it might be a side character who has something that I want to explore. But yeah, I think it's like every story has those two things at least, and then probably another thing or two on
Okay,
top.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's good to have that representation because, yeah, as you said, there tends to be a lot of intersectionality between, especially when it comes to
Right.
neurodivergence and
Right.
queerness, and certainly, of course, ethnicity and country of origin. So it's great
Right.
to have representation in
Mhm.
books, of people's real lives.
Yeah.
Outside of writing, you're also involved in an organization called My Galvanized Friend, and I'd love to learn more about that. So, like, what
Yes.
got you inspired to get involved with that?
Yeah, so it was actually uh this might be more information than you asked for, but there is a queer-owned coffee shop in my city called Brick Road Coffee. They have like a little lending library in there. They have like all these events and stuff. So they were already kind of like doing a lot of queer literature related stuff. They were even hosting author events. Like I did an author event with them a few times. And so I became close with the owners. And there's also a couple other people who like really, really love books who go there and who are also queer. And so we just decided that we were gonna start a nonprofit. The main thing we do right now is the literary magazine for My Galvanized Friend. So I think we just do it on a 6 month basis right now. We'll put out like a literary magazine. We take submissions and, you know, put together like a queer literary magazine with like a different theme every time. Our most recent one we are going to put out in the new year, and that was Queer Joy was the theme for that one. So there's always like a different theme, and then they also do a book club, a queer book club at the library, and there's author events and stuff like that. So it's just kind of trying to like bring queer literature and art to like we're based in Tempe, Arizona, but like so that's like locally where we're really working, but also just like in the Lit Mag is like digital. So it's like kind of anyone can, you don't have to be in Tempe to submit to that or to be part of that.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun with it. I think it's really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and that's great that you can get submissions from really anywhere for the magazine
Right.
specifically. And I think it's important to highlight those different themes and, of course, writing from queer authors. That's really
Yes.
cool. Yeah. So, do you put out calls for contributing stories to the magazine online, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram account and then on our website there's like a place to submit your work and it's not just writing but it's also art.
Oh, cool.
So you can submit like anything that you have that fits that theme. You could also submit stuff that doesn't fit the theme, and then if we really like it, we might like save it for a theme one day, but maybe don't like plan for that. But in general, that's always open on the website. For the next one that's been announced, you'll be able to submit your work, art, poetry, essays, fiction, anywhere from like, a short poem that's like 2 lines to I think a max of maybe 4 or 5,000 words, but that's like a little bit on the high end. Most of it is like maybe 1 to 3,000 words for the long form. So yeah, you can submit on the website or you can find us on Instagram, My Galvanized Friend. The name is a nod to Wicked and so is Brick Road or The Wizard of Oz because, back in the day, if you clock someone else as maybe being queer, you can't just say, "Are you gay?" You would say, "Are you a friend of Dorothy?"
Hmm.
And then, they would say yes if they're queer. And so Brick Road is like all Wizard of Oz theme. And since My Galvanized Friend is like associated with Brick Road,
Hmm.
also Wizard of Oz theme. And that's the like Tin Man My Galvanized Friend. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay, cool. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your writing?
So I am on all the social media except for really Twitter. I'm not really on there. But I am on Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram. I'm sort of on TikTok, not really, but I have like two videos on there. Tumblr, I occasionally check. I have Twitter, but I don't post there. I just
Mhm.
have it so that no one can steal my name.
Exactly. Yep. I'll definitely put a link to your website in the
Sure.
show notes,
Thank
and I can
you.
put some of your socials in there too, and so
Yeah,
people
and
can
I'll
find
have
you
all of
everywhere.
that also on my website too, so
Okay.
you'll be able to find me. If you have my website, you can find me anywhere.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for being on the show. As we close out, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know or anything that they can do to help or support the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, I just if you I mean Golden Boy's Guide to Bipolar, buy it.
Hmm.
But really just like I think, when it comes to, I mean, my expertise is like writing, but really like any kind of art, just knowing like where it comes from and supporting art from marginalized creators and art is, I think, also activism. So just knowing that, like, I think it can like change people. So I do kind of hope that, if you know someone who has a certain experience or something, maybe read a book from someone who has that experience. And yeah, that's kind of like where I try to like write my stories and like maybe this will help someone else be seen by their loved ones or something. So
Yeah. Reading books or writing and consuming art that people who have the lived experience with is so important in order to kind of really truly understand what people's experiences are like. Thank you so much for being on
thank
my show
you.
today. I appreciate it.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.